HOA, Karen cuts. Tree without permission, it falls on her house. But she tries to blame me. Saturdays in Willow Creek are usually peaceful. The kind of mornings where you step outside with a cup of coffee and hear nothing but birds chirping and sprinklers hissing. But not this Saturday. Oh no, this particular Saturday was pierced by the most ungodly sound of a chainsaw revving like it was being wielded by the Tasmanian Devil himself. I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing and squinted across the street toward Karen's house. Sure enough, there she was in her outrageous sunhat and yoga pants, hollering orders at a couple of guys wrestling with a towering oak tree. Now listen, I don't have anything against tree removal when it's done right. But that oak wasn't just any tree. It sat smack on the property line between my yard and hers, and as far as I knew, any work on it needed both our permissions. Of course, Karen, in all her HOA glory, had decided she was above such trivial matters as permission. I walked across the street with a calm that I didn't feel, dodging her little yappy dog that lunged at me through the fence. "Karen," I called out over the screaming chainsaw. "What are you doing?" Karen turned around, a smug smile plastered on her face. "Oh, good morning, Jake. I'm having this unsightly tree removed. It's leaning dangerously, you know. Think of it as a service to the neighborhood." I crossed my arms. "Service to the neighborhood?" "Karen, that oak's been there longer than both our houses. It's sturdy as a rock, and it happens to be half mine." She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's barely on your side, and it's going to drop branches on my roof one day. I'm just being proactive." I stared at her, realizing that reasoning with Karen was about as effective as arguing with her yappy dog. "Well," I said, "you better make sure it doesn't come down on my side, or we're going to have a real problem." "Oh, it'll be fine," she trilled and turned back to supervise the shouting workers. Spoiler alert, it was not fine. Not an hour later, I was back on my porch watching the spectacle unfold. The workers had roped the mighty oak and were yanking it in Karen's direction with some questionable equipment. But even from my side of the street, I could tell their angle was all wrong. The oak gave a creak, then a groan, then a mighty crack. "Watch out!" one of the workers hollered as the tree broke loose from their ropes like a charging bull. It tilted not toward Karen's yard, not toward mine, but dead center at Karen's roof. Smash! The crash reverberated through the cul-de-sac as half the tree obliterated Karen's pristine shingles. Bits of debris rained down like confetti, and a cloud of dust rose from the wreckage. Karen stood frozen in the middle of her lawn, her mouth forming a perfect O of disbelief. Then, naturally, she turned her gaze directly onto me. "This is your fault, Jake," Karen shrieked as I stepped across the street again, choking back laughter at the sheer absurdity of the situation. "My fault," I said, motioning toward the disaster still settling on her roof. "Karen, you're the one who decided to cut down a perfectly healthy tree without anyone's permission." "Yes, but it wouldn't have fallen if you weren't, I don't know, standing there with your bad energy." She flailed her arms wildly. "You were practically inviting it to fall the wrong way." "You're blaming the tree falling on my energy," I deadpanned. "Well, you should have stopped me," she yelled, as if I had any control over her questionable life choices. The gathering crowd of neighbors stifled giggles behind cupped hands. Even the workers had paused to exchange looks that said, "Seriously?" "Karen," I said, exhaling slowly to keep from losing my temper, "you didn't ask for my permission. You ignored common sense. And now half your house looks like a lumber yard. You have no one to blame but yourself." "Don't you dare take that tone with me," she huffed. "I'm calling the HOA. I'm calling the city. I'm calling everyone." "Great," I said, turning back toward my driveway. "While you do that, maybe call your insurance company too." Over the next week, the saga escalated. Karen, true to her word, filed a complaint with the HOA, claiming that my dangerous tree had caused substantial damage to her property. Never mind that she's the one who'd had it cut down without permission. The HOA president, Mitch, stopped by one afternoon, clipboard in hand. Mitch, to his credit, was a reasonable guy. "Jake," he said, clearing his throat awkwardly, "Karen's filed a report claiming you neglected a hazardous tree on the property line." I handed him a folder containing my photos of the tree, Karen's workers, and even the stump now sitting on her side of the line. "Mitch, take a look at that and tell me who's really at fault." Mitch barely flipped through the first couple of pictures before shaking his head. "Good grief, Jake, this is on Karen." That should have been the end of it, but Karen, fueled by her pride and possibly by dozens of HOA rule books, wasn't about to back down. Karen's antics were the talk of the neighborhood. While I tried to stay out of the drama, my neighbors were more than happy to take up the cause. "I have half a mind to start a petition," yelled Mrs. Hargrove, a retired teacher who lived 2 doors down. "Karen's been out of control for years. This tree incident is just the icing on the cake." Even Helen, who usually sided with Karen, seemed fed up. "She cut down your tree and tried to blame you." Helen sputtered over coffee at the local diner. "That's a new low, even for her. You have my vote if this goes to mediation." Eventually, Karen's constant complaining and bogus claims forced the HOA to hold an official meeting. The entire neighborhood showed up to witness what they presumed would be Karen's final meltdown. "This tree was Jake's responsibility," Karen declared dramatically, pointing a finger at me from across the community center. Karen, Brady, now the acting HOA chairman, said tiredly, "The evidence clearly shows you hired workers to cut down the tree without notifying the HOA or Jake, which is a violation of multiple policies." "And it fell on my house," she cried. "That's a natural consequence of cutting a tree with no plan," Brady replied. The room erupted in stifled chuckles. After an hour of deliberation, the HOA ruled in my favor. Karen would have to cover all her repair costs, issue a public apology to the community, and, most importantly, leave the oak stumps alone. She stormed out, muttering something about conspiracy theories, but the neighbors stayed to celebrate. With the drama behind us, peace returned to Willow Creek. Karen stayed out of my way, though she did shoot me glares whenever we crossed paths. The best part, a few neighbors pitched in and helped me plant a new oak sapling near the old stump. "This one," I said with a grin, patting the young tree, "is staying right where it belongs." And so it did. I dared to hope Karen had learned her lesson. After all, how do you bounce back from blaming someone else for destroying your own house? But Karen, being Karen, wasn't ready to slink into quiet suburbia just yet. It started small, as all good Karen schemes do. She began walking her yappy little dog past my house multiple times a day, complete with exaggerated pauses at the new oak sapling. Whenever she thought I wasn't looking, she'd shake her head dramatically, as though the young tree personally offended her. Then came her comments at HOA meetings. "It's a nice tree," she'd say, her voice thick with sarcasm that could curdle milk. "But shouldn't we discuss the impact it might have on neighborhood aesthetics? You know, this being such a high-standard community." Brady, bless his heart, barely suppressed an eye roll the size of the sapling itself. "The tree is fine, Karen. Can we move on?" But Karen wasn't one for moving on. It was only a matter of time before she escalated her efforts. One morning, I stepped onto my porch to find Karen suspiciously close to my sapling, armed with a tape measure and a clipboard. "Karen," I called out, stepping closer, "why are you measuring my tree?" "Oh, I'm just checking to make sure it doesn't grow too tall," she said sweetly, though her smile was as fake as the pearls around her neck. "Tall trees can block sunlight from nearby gardens, you know." "Karen," I replied, crossing my arms, "your house is practically a football field away, and last I checked, your garden was a single potted cactus." She gasped, clutching her clipboard like I'd just insulted her dog. "Well, some of us care about the future of this community." With that, she stomped off, though not before muttering something under her breath about bylaws. Sure enough, 2 days later, Brady knocked on my door looking deeply unimpressed. Jake, I hate to do this, but Karen submitted a formal complaint about your obnoxiously positioned tree. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. You're kidding me. I wish, said Brady, handing me the form. Under reason for complaint, Karen had written, potential danger to nearby property, shade intrusion, and general misuse of land. Brady rubbed his temples. We'll have to review it during the next meeting, but between you and me, this is ridiculous. Oh, you don't have to tell me, I said. If she keeps this up, I might start charging tickets for entertainment. Word of Karen's latest antics spread quickly. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the community center was standing room only. Karen arrived with her usual air of self-importance, clutching her clipboard like it was the Constitution itself. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, as though addressing a royal court, before we discuss mundane matters, like street cleaning schedules, I'd like to present my case regarding the disruptive tree at Mr. Jake's property. I leaned back in my chair, fighting the urge to grin. Brady, sitting at the head of the table, gestured for Karen to continue. This tree, she said, producing a PowerPoint slide. Yes, really. Poses a number of threats to property values and the harmony of our beloved neighborhood. I move that it be removed immediately. Before Brady could respond, Mrs. Hargrove shot to her feet. Karen, you're the only one out here who seems to think a baby tree is bringing down the whole neighborhood. The room erupted in nods and murmurs of agreement. Jim, always quick with a comeback, added, and remind me again, Karen, who exactly turned their own house into a lumber storage facility? Even Brady couldn't suppress his smirk at that one. Karen turned bright red but pressed on, her voice growing shriller. This is an attack on order, on standards, on me, and I won't stand for it. Well, I said, finally breaking my silence, maybe you should sit down then. That earned a round of laughter so loud, Karen actually did sit, fuming in silence for the rest of the meeting. I thought the new oak sapling was safe after that, but Karen clearly wasn't done. A few nights later, I was awoken by the unmistakable sound of something crunching outside. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped onto the porch just in time to see Karen scrambling away from the tree with a pair of garden shears. Karen, I called out, shining the light directly on her. Her face froze like a kid caught sneaking cookies before dinner. Oh, Jake, I was just trimming. Weeds. Yes, weeds, around your tree. You're welcome. Karen, I said, barely keeping my voice level, those weeds are called grass. Now, step away from my tree. With a huff and some muttered excuse about a misunderstanding, she scurried back to her house. Needless to say, security cameras were promptly installed the next morning. The next HOA meeting was the last straw for Karen. Despite her protests and increasingly wild claims, the board officially declared the oak sapling off limits. Anyone caught tampering with it, Brady said, shooting Karen a pointed look, will face immediate consequences, including fines and possible legal action. Karen crossed her arms and muttered something about moving to a gated community. To everyone's relief, within the month, she put her house on the market. The neighborhood held an unofficial Goodbye Karen barbecue, the day her moving truck pulled away. Someone even brought a cake decorated with a tiny, toothpick-sized oak tree on top. Years later, the oak tree grew tall and strong, its branches shading the very spot where Karen's chaos first took root. The neighbors often gathered near it, sharing stories, laughing, and marveling at how peaceful the neighborhood had become. And every time I walked by, I gave that oak a pat and thought to myself, this tree has seen some things. When Karen finally left, a collective sigh of relief swept through Willow Creek. The air felt lighter, the nights quieter, and even the yappy dogs seemed to bark less. But while the neighborhood celebrated her departure, no one could have predicted how quickly the universe would test that peace. The "for sale" sign on Karen's lawn barely had time to gather dust before it was swapped out for a "sold" one. Soon after, the moving trucks rolled up, and with them came Kevin. Kevin was unique. Unlike Karen's overbearing glare and clipboard obsession, Kevin brought a laid-back, almost too laid-back vibe. The first day he moved in, he parked his beat-up camper van in the driveway, unloaded a bunch of beanbag chairs, and slapped a Live, Laugh, Love sign in the window. Not exactly what we call HOA material. It didn't take long for Kevin's do-it-your-own-way philosophy to raise eyebrows in the neighborhood. First, there was the flamingo incident. Somehow, in the span of a weekend, Kevin managed to populate his entire front yard with a flock of pink lawn flamingos. And not just peacefully standing flamingos. These were posed like they were invading a beach, complete with tiki torches and a plastic kiddie pool filled with sand. It wasn't long before Brady showed up on my doorstep, clipboard in hand. That poor guy hadn't gotten a break since Karen left. "Well," I said with a grin, leaning against my doorframe, "what's the issue now?" "Jake," he huffed, flipping his clipboard to reveal photos of Kevin's yard. "How do I even begin? There are bylaws about lawn decor, right?" I smirked. Funny, I thought Karen knew them all. Too bad she's not around to enforce them anymore. Brady sighed. "We need to have a talk with Kevin. You're coming with me." When we arrived at Kevin's, he greeted us like we were old college buddies. "Hey neighbors," he said, handing us cups of lemonade. "You here to check out the Flamingo Fiesta? Standing room only these days." "Kevin," Brady began, rubbing his temples, "the HOA has rules about, excessive lawn decorations. Your display might be a tad bit over the top." Kevin blinked, then smiled. "No problem, boss. I'll tone it down. How about I swap out the flamingos for something more subtle? Maybe dinosaurs?" Brady walked back home muttering something about ungrateful birds. Meanwhile, my beloved oak, now lovingly referred to as the Survivor by the neighbors, had become a sort of town mascot. Families picnicked under its shade, kids climbed its sturdy branches, and in the fall, it rained down golden leaves, like confetti. But one morning, as I admired its growing canopy, I noticed something strange. The leaves on one side of the tree were turning brown, while the rest remained lush and green. Alarm bells went off in my head. I called Angela, our unofficial neighborhood plant whisperer, who promptly arrived with her tool bag and a determined look. "Jake," she said, inspecting the tree's bark, "we've got pests." "Pests?" I exclaimed. "Why would pests pick my tree out of all the others?" Angela gave me a knowing look. "Because," she said with a smirk, "this is the only tree in the neighborhood that's been through an HOA war. It's got character." With Angela's help, we rallied a tree-saving brigade, complete with pest control sprays, mulch, and a lot of TLC. Kevin even joined in, bringing organic remedies he insisted he'd learned from a YouTube guru with 10 million views. "Don't worry," Kevin said confidently, pouring something into a spray bottle. "This mixture is guaranteed to keep pests away. It's like kombucha for trees." Angela watched nervously as Kevin sprayed a few branches, and I silently hoped that the Survivor would, well, survive Kevin's graduate-level experimentation. Surprisingly, Kevin proved to be more helpful than expected. His unconventional methods may have raised eyebrows, but they worked. Within weeks, the oak was thriving again, and Kevin earned a few brownie points with the neighbors. But Kevin wasn't just about trees. He quickly became the neighborhood's problem-solving guru in the most unexpected ways. When Mrs. Hargrove's ancient lawnmower gave up mid-yard, Kevin turned it into an impromptu project. 2 hours and some duct tape later, he'd rigged it with solar panels. "Don't question it," he said proudly. "It's futuristic now." Even Brady grudgingly admitted that, while Kevin's approach to HOA life was unconventional, he brought a certain charm. "Kinda makes you miss Karen, huh?" Kevin told me one day, as we both watched Brady try to explain lawn flamingo bylaws to new neighbors moving in 3 houses down. Not even a little, I replied with a laugh. Over the months, the oak tree continued to grow strong, a symbol for all of us. Kevin's antics, while occasionally eyebrow-raising, became a source of community laughter and camaraderie. The neighborhood had found its rhythm again, one incident at a time. And as for me, I kept tending my yard, chatting with neighbors, and sharing the occasional knowing glance with the survivor. Because no matter what challenges came our way, whether it was flamingos, kombucha Kevin, or the next self-declared rule enforcer, I knew one thing for sure. This neighborhood would always rise to the occasion, with a little laughter, a little teamwork, and one very resilient oak tree. The end.